I wanted to take an opportunity to go through some scriptures in Isaiah chapter 44. Specifically, I'm going to be reading from the Isaiah Institute translation, sometimes known as the Gileadi translation, a super helpful translation of Isaiah that is very well laid out and brings to light many of the things that are buried deep in Isaiah because of the denseness of the text. So if you're used to reading the King James Version, for example, you can compare them side by side, which may be a fruitful endeavor for you to do so. But be that as it may, you can find free ways to read it. There's his website out there, which I'll put in the link of the description because I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But lots of ways to find this, and I just happen to have it here in my scripture notes app, so that's good. But specifically on the topic of idols, we suffer from idolatry more than any other people at any other time in the history of the world. And you say, how could that be? Because many people reduce idolatry down to the literal practice of worshiping idols, as in like golden or materials made of wood or stone or gold or whatever. And actually, there's a whole lot more that goes into idolatry, the practice of idolatry, than that. And there's a reason why it's so high up in the Ten Commandments. Like, what is it, number 2? So, why do you think that is? You ever wonder if there's a hierarchy of commandments in the Ten Commandments? There may be. Might be worth thinking about. So, let's start here in verse 9. It says, this is the Lord speaking, all who manufacture idols are deranged. The things they cherish profit nothing. Those who promote them are themselves sightless and mindless to their own dismay. So we need to pay attention throughout these scriptures at the description of the people who worship idols. We'll see the words used are things like deranged, sightless, mindless. Okay, they are not thinking about what they're worshiping, and they're not taking obvious signs that the idol is not what they think it is and using that to judge its effectiveness. I wanted to point out under the definition of what is an idol, if you look up in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, which is an extremely useful source for getting closer to what the people in the King James, for example, might have meant by certain terms. This is really helpful for the Book of Mormon, which was first published in 1830, so right around the time of this dictionary. You can get much better ideas of what the words were intended to mean at the time, and which have been changed since then. So if you look under the definition of what is an idol in 1828 Webster's, the fourth definition is extremely helpful. It says, anything on which we set our affections, that to which we indulge in excessive and sinful attachment. An idol is anything which usurps the place of God in the hearts of his rational creatures. Now, that's a powerful definition. And putting it into other terms, it is anything that you give more importance and more value than it actually has, especially with relationship to God. And the point that it made about it being in his rational creatures is so important because it is through your rational mind and your thoughts and your ability to think that the Spirit of God teaches you what is right and what is wrong, and it's how you decide between those things. And so when we are practicing idolatry, we are deranged and sightless and mindless because we are not exercising our rational capabilities to the full extent that they could be exercised. And this is a huge problem. So, verse 10, we start to go through the characteristics of people who make idols. So it says, who would fashion a god or cast an idol that cannot benefit them? 11, their whole society is confused. Their fabricators are mere mortals. Were they all to assemble and take their stand before me, they would at once cringe in fear. So, again, we have the description of the whole society being confused, which is like deranged and mindless. And he's pointing out that the people that make idols are themselves mere mortals. And how can somebody that's mortal make something that's divine? You can't take something of a lower order and make something of a higher order out of it. Good comes from above. Higher order things bring things to that of a lower state, not the opposite. Incidentally, this is why you cannot, in a traditional LDS mindset, you cannot ordain someone to a priesthood office of a higher office than that which you currently hold. And that should be abundantly obvious why. You can't use something lower to make something higher. It just doesn't work. So we have a definition from the Book of Mormon in 2 Nephi chapter 9, verse 51. It says, "Wherefore, do not spend money for that which is of no worth, nor your labor for that which cannot satisfy. Hearken diligently unto me, and remember the words which I have spoken, and come unto the Holy One of Israel, and feast upon that which perisheth not, neither can be corrupted, and let your soul delight in fatness." And it's an injunction to think carefully about the characteristics of what you are spending your time and your worship and your adoration and your labor for, not just what you might consider the things of the world, like I don't know, fancy cars or boats or vacations or whatever, or fancy clothes, but also the things that you ascribe more importance to. You cannot make your God yourself. People cannot make their God. And so when you try to make God into something that he's not, and you worship that version of him, you are practicing idolatry. When you say things like, "I don't think God would ever punish someone who does something wrong," and you ignore the plethora of examples from the scriptures of him doing exactly that, you are making to yourself a God that doesn't exist and then worshiping it. So you're practicing idolatry. Instead, what you should do is go to God and say, "I noticed that that you do these things, and I don't understand why. And to me, it seems like a bad thing, but I know because you're God, you do what's good. So teach me why punishing that which is evil is a good thing to do, and teach me how it's good for everyone." And he will. So don't make God into something he's not and then worship that. That's idolatry. Notice how when it's describing the society, this is both a dual prophecy of him describing his time, the time of Isaiah, but also in the last days. It says everyone is confused. It doesn't say except this specific group of Christians or except LDS people or whatever. Every single one of the people of mortals are confused because they are assembling idols. And so unless you explicitly go out of your way to understand what this means and don't bow down to idols, you are going to be guilty of this. And what does he say? If you actually came and stood before God, you would cringe in fear because of the realization of the difference between how he actually is and what you have made him to be. Verse 12, "The smith with his tools works the iron over the coals and gives it shape by hammering. He forges his God by the strength of his arm. When he becomes hungry, he no longer has strength. If he fails to drink water, he begins to grow faint." So this is, again, getting back to that idea of a person, a mortal, fashioning God from just mundane, ordinary things. And it's pointing out the weakness of his mortality. He gets tired while he's making this thing. He gets hungry while he's working. And he has to quit because he needs to drink water and he needs to rest. And so the question again becomes, and I wrote it down here, can a mortal who has to eat and drink and stay alive create something that's immortal with his hands? And the answer is, of course, no. All good comes from above. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 1, verses 16, it describes people who I described before, which are people that seek to make their own God. It says, "They seek not the Lord to establish his righteousness, but every man walketh in his own way, and after the image of his own God. whose image is in the likeness of the world, whose substance is that of an idol, which waxeth old and perish in Babylon, and shall perish in Babylon, even Babylon the Great, which shall fall. So people, again, are making their own God after their own image, and people are their own God. They say, I like what I want is God to be this way and this way and this way. And keep in mind that that usually is a way that makes them already good, and they don't have to change anything about themselves, and that God is going to somehow give them everything that they want, even if what they want isn't very good. And that's why the image is in the likeness of the world. It's in the likeness of Babylon, which is the whole law and order of Babylon is to get gain. It's to get what I want, no matter the cost to anyone else. That's Babylon. And when you make an idol, what you're doing is, I want a God who will give me what I want, no matter the cost. And the result is the society that we currently live in. Like, that's not a good thing at all. So, is there a difference between an incomplete or incorrect understanding of how God actually is and making an idol? And of course, there is a difference. So we are all required by the laws of God to walk up to our best sincere understanding of how he is. Understandably, because our understanding is imperfect, we will have mistakes in our model. However, if you're humble and you know that there's going to be mistakes in your model, God is very willing and forgiving of those who, through their own weakness, do things that are different than he is because they thought that's what he would do. And he will teach those people how he is different. And as soon as he shows you how he is different, you update your model and you keep going on. And therefore, you continue to walk with him and not in sin. The difference with idols is you go out of your way to make God what you want. And you think that you're right and you won't change based on new information. You're insensible and your mind doesn't work. Let's go on to verse 13. So this is another example of the smith before. It says, the woodworker draws the diagram, sketching his idol with a marker. He creates it by chiseling to the outline of the dividers. He gives it a human likeness, resembling a man's beauty, fit to lodge in a house. He is required to cut down cedars. He must select holms and oaks and care for them among the trees of the forest. He plants firs, which the rain makes grow. So again, this is the same exact principle as before. The woodworker is using his mortal, limited means to create a god, and he's even making it in the likeness of a man. Now, when we talk about likenesses and gods, does man make God in his image, or is man made in God's image? And those are very different points. And the purpose of man is to learn more about what the image of God is and conform their own image to that. So you are to go out of your way to learn more about what God would do if he was in your situation, what he would think, what he would feel, and what he would do. So every commandment that God gives us in the scriptures and through other people who are more like him than we are meant to be representations and easier to see examples of what God would do. And they point you to a spiritual principle. So if you keep the commandments, God will show you the principles that are associated with them, and he will help you to become more like that. And as he does that, you will grow in your character and you will grow to be more like him, and which is the point. So speaking of this, let's reference both Matthew 15, 7 through 10 and Isaiah 29, 13. The first reference is the Lord quoting this verse from Isaiah, where he says, wherefore the Lord said unto me, forasmuch as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear towards me is taught by the precept of men. So a characteristic of idolatry is that you pay lip service. This is literally what it's called, lip service, to the ideas of a God and of being obedient, but your heart desires other things. It desires to have what you want instead of what God wants. And another way to think about idolatry is to think about it as the forms of godliness without the power of godliness. There's an extremely false teaching in many churches today, especially in the LDS church, where people teach that you can have the authority of God without having the power of God. And this is just not true. Anywhere somebody has the authority of God, they will also have the power of God. And if they do not have one, they do not have the other. And it's much easier to see the power of God than it is to see the authority of God. So if someone claims to have authority from God, but they can't do any of his works, any of the works that you would see the apostles of old do or the prophets of old do, and they can't do those things and make no claim to be able to do them, then you can put them down as imposters, because if they do not have the authority from God or the power from God, they do not have the authority from God. They're one and the same. And if you look up in the Greek what those words mean, you'll see that those ideas are interchangeably translated in the New Testament as both power and or authority, depending on the verse. And so they're the exact same idea. And this shouldn't be some sort of mind-altering or earth-shattering revelation to anyone who is familiar with the LDS Doctrine and Covenants that state things like the powers of heaven are inseparably connected, the rights of the priesthood, in other words, the rights to be like God, are inseparably connected from the powers of heaven. Inseparably connected means you literally cannot disassemble them. You can't disassemble the rights, the authority, from the powers of heaven, the power. So it could not be more clear than that. And people need to right themselves in this way, or they'll continue to be led down paths that are going to serve them less and less the more the world descends into the chaos caused by idolatry. Verse 15 is a continued injunction against people who build their own idols and the behavior that they have. It says that in verse 14 it says, he plants furs which the rain makes grows, that which serves men as fuel, which they use to warm themselves or light fire with to bake bread. Of that they create gods which they adore. From it they make idols to which they stoop. So again, just the imagery of continuing to worship things that have not even the power of the people who are creating them. Okay, the smith and the woodworker are already more like God than the idols that they create. Nothing of this world is worth really anything. Everything that you want actually comes from above, and by seeking after those higher things, those higher principles, and after what God is actually like himself, you will find the peace and joy and happiness that you are seeking. But instead, people search for the easy way out and for the idols that they've created in their own mind. Verse 16, half of it they burn in the fire, over it they broil a roast. They eat the meat and are satisfied. They also warm themselves and say, it is warm in front of the fire. So what is it that people are actually worshiping when they're worshiping idolatry? I said before that they are making gods in order to worship something that will give them what they want. You can really boil this down into carnal security, to money. They're worshiping the ability to get warm and eat food, to eat and drink and be merry. And it really won't serve us to believe that those are the things that we need. Carnal security, if you put all of your trust in things external to you, in your store, in your money, in your country, in your government, in your therapist, in any of these things, in your pharmaceuticals, like people taking drugs that they think they're going to solve all their problems, these really aren't the things that are going to help you. The only true security that you can find comes from God, and it comes from being able to learn and to follow how he is. And that is something that you're going to need to cling to and to change and to become like him as these things are ripped away, because not all things will continue forever. Your money is not going to continue forever, especially if you go through and read and believe what the words of Isaiah. So there's nothing that is physical in this world that will not be destroyed and taken away eventually. The only thing that you can have is actually your character that is inside you that you get from God, and that he will help you grow to become more like his as you seek him. So verse 17, again, it says, after they've made a fire and and use it to cook and to warm themselves. From the rest they make a god, their idol, to which they bow in adoration and pray, "Save us, you are our God." So if you apply that to money, for example, you can say that, people spend their money on everything that they want to, and then they look at the surplus money that they have and they say, this will save us. Good thing we have this. And they make it their God. Do you see how immaterial or how material that is and how easy it is for it to go away? Like, we are currently awash in a land full of so much unwarranted prosperity that when problems happen, it seems like they're no big deal. But I want you to imagine situations where everything that you had in your life was only because of how hard you worked and how smart you were, and how little most people would have if that was the case. And then they would find a very different valuation of what things are the best things. We can say it like that. In verse 18, it says, "They have become unaware and insensible. Their eyes are glazed, so they cannot see. Their minds are incapable of discernment." Right? We go back to these, they're deranged, they're mindless, they're confused, they're incapable of discernment, they're unaware and insensible. The logic doesn't add up when you're full of idolatry. When someone comes to you and says, God called me to be whatever, and I'm the only person that holds all the keys of the priesthood or has the keys of salvation, or I'm the only person that can preach to you, and you say, but you don't have any of the things in your life that God said people would have, and a lot of what you're saying is directly contradicting the scriptures, for example, and they say, well, you just have to believe me, and otherwise we'll kick you out of our church, or we'll kick you out of our group, or you won't have the blessings that you want. It is completely insensible to believe that position. And you should set that person down as an imposter. When God asks you to believe something that he sends you, or if he asks you to believe a messenger's message, because he does send true messengers, that's a very true thing. He sends them with evidence that they're true. He sends them with his power and with his authority. And you can find from them things that you didn't know before, solutions to problems that you haven't been able to solve, for example, answers to questions that you haven't been able to find. You can see in them an example of someone who overcomes more of this world than you otherwise could, someone who's better organized than you, or does more good than you, or helps more people than you, or withstands more pain than you. Like, these are all signs, the true tokens and signs of what a true messenger is like. It has nothing to do with the fancy robes they wear or the fancy titles they take or anything like that. And so you become insensible when you stop using your rational mind to determine what actually is good and put instead of it a placeholder that looks at those worldly trappings that can be so easily duplicated and falsified. And that's why your minds are incapable of discernment. In the Book of Mormon, in 2 Nephi 28, we have an important scripture. It says, "For the kingdom of the devil must shake, and they which belong to it must needs be stirred unto repentance, or the devil will grasp them with his everlasting chains, and they be stirred up to anger and perish. For behold, at that day shall he rage in the hearts of the children of men, and stir them up to anger against that which is good. And others he will pacify and lull them away into carnal security, that they will say, All is well in Zion, yea, Zion prospereth, all is well." So we have our money, we have everything we need, so we're all good. "And thus the devil cheats their souls, and leadeth them away carefully down to hell. And behold, others he flattereth away, and telleth them there is no hell. And he saith unto them, I am no devil, for there is none. And thus he whispereth in their ears, until he grasps them with his awful chains, from whence there is no deliverance." So there's all kinds of persuasion going on to get people to believe in the idols that they've made, their carnal security, and their flattering lies. Oh, God would never punish anyone for being evil, and there actually isn't any consequences for doing what you want. Just follow whatever your body wants to do. And it doesn't work that way. But it says, "Therefore, woe unto him that be at ease in Zion, woe unto him that crieth, All is well. Yea, woe be unto him that hearkeneth unto the precepts of men, and denieth the power of God and the gift of the Holy Ghost. Yea, woe be unto him that saith, We have received, and we need no more." Okay, we need to be continuously taught more about how God is and become like that. And as soon as someone says, you can't go any farther because I'm the only person that God can tell stuff to, and if he hasn't told me, he's not going to tell anyone, you found yourself in a bad situation. You should not be in that situation. Get yourself out of there. You'll be much happier finding actual true messengers. These last two verses, verse 19 and 20, they reflect not. Again, that's an insensible position, right? They will not use their minds. They will not have an introspection, nor have the sense or comprehension to say, a part of this I burned in the fire. I also baked bread in its embers, roasted meat and ate it. Am I not making an abomination of what is left? Do I not stoop to a mere lump of wood? They are followers of ashes. Their deluded minds have distracted them. They cannot liberate themselves from them or say, surely this thing is my hand, or surely this thing in my hand is a fraud. So to sum up this teaching on idolatry, people become so insensitive. The longer you follow lies and refuse to see what is obvious, the harder what is obvious becomes to see. That's why it says in verse 20 that they cannot liberate themselves from them or say, surely this thing in my hand is a fraud. And so, what method is left for people who are stuck in a trap like this that cannot see what is abundantly obvious anymore? Well, God sends people to tell them that they're messed up. There's no easy or nice way to say that. It's a very loving thing for him to do, and it usually results in the person that comes being treated horribly by the people they've come to help. But this is exactly the story of every prophet in the scriptures. Every time someone was sent to a people to help them because they had become insensible and no longer able to see that they were evil, often thinking that they were righteous instead of evil, God sent them a person from him, from above, to help. And almost to the person, they are rejected and treated and oftentimes stoned or martyred or killed. And the Lord himself was even no exception to that. He came to a people to save them, and they rejected everything about him. And so I would ask you to consider, independent of anything that you currently believe, how is it that you're making idols in your life? What things have you set up that are no longer connected to the true vine and are dead and rotting husks of what they ought to be? And is there anybody in your life that you know that has come and told you something that you probably were offended by, but that if you really were honest with yourself, you can see that what they're saying is true? Go through and think about those things and go and pray and ask God what's true. God will reveal to you what is true and what in your life is a fabrication or a falsehood or a lie or an idol. And it might be an extremely painful process to have God reveal to you what your idols are. But there's no other way to get out of the insensibility or the derangement, the blindness, than to face it with honesty and integrity and courage. And I promise you that if you do that, God will show those things to you and he will send you people to help you to see those things too. I'll close with this one verse from D&C 30, verse 2, just the first part of it. It says, but your mind has been on the things of the earth more than on the things of me, your maker, in the ministry whereunto you have been called, and you have not given heed unto my spirit. One final piece of advice that I would offer is, don't think that just because somebody says the words God and talks about churchy type things, that they are not fully guilty of all of these things. The worst kinds of idols, the worst kinds of wolves wear sheep's clothing. And so just because someone says and talks a lot about Jesus doesn't mean that they know anything about him at all.